I'm delighted to be with you here today to take you on a tantalizing detective story that seeks to answer the question of whether or not Scandinavian explorers visited North America perhaps centuries before Christopher Columbus. And it's scholarly research that's based on explorations and site investigations of the Rune Stones, as well as a deep dive into archives in North America and the United States to find out whether or not they're true. But I'm also going to talk about the other side of the equation, which is the incredible popular hypotheses that are out there in mainstream and other media that try to offer an alternative theory of how these Rune Stones came to be. First, about my organization that I belong to, the American Association for Runic Studies. We're an organization that's been around for about a decade. We partner with Uppsala University in Sweden, which has the largest database of runes for research in the world. We also affiliate with organizations like the Smithsonian Institution and others. And just last week, the Swedish Council of America issued a proclamation commending us for the quality of our scholarly research. But we have another role that we play as well, too, which is to look for opportunities to continuously debunk some of these other alternative stories that are presented to the general public and also to students as fact. Let's talk about rune stones first. As you can see from this map, runes are found throughout Scandinavian countries. They have been in existence. They were part of a means of leaving messages for more than 1,500 years. And throughout throughout the European continent, there are close to 7,000 rune stones. You can find them as far north as Russia and as far south as Italy and into the United Kingdom. And as you can see, most of those runes are actually found in Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. And you can see three eras of the extension of these runes. The pre-Viking era of between 100 and 750 AD, the Viking Age, which is an age of conquest, and then the medieval age, which was an age of exploration and trade. These are what medieval runes look like. There were three alphabets that were designed over time. And as you can see, this is transliterated to our alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F. Actually, in the Scandinavian language, this is the Futhark alphabet. You would actually see it written F-U-T-H-A-R-K, but this is so that you have a sense of what it looks like. So let's look at runes. As I said, these are found throughout all of Northern Europe, and this is an example of a stone that dates back to 1000 AD that actually is a Norse poem. Runes like these were often devised as memorials to sons and daughters, fathers and sons, husbands and wives, or they might be found simply as the equivalent of Kilroy was here, some stone carver who put his name into the side of a cathedral. And they've been studied for about 400 years by Scandinavian scholars and researchers, and what they look for essentially are several things. One is, from what era of the Futhark alphabet did this come? What does the message actually say? What's the cultural context of why that message was left and how it was expressed? Runic scholars will go up to those stones and they'll examine them by hand, and they're specifically looking for a couple of different things. One is often a carver would put his name on the stone and they would often date them. And so part of this is to look at the body of work. Who carved what stones and where did they do this? And so while most of those stones are in Europe, the most famous rune stone in the world is actually in Minnesota. It is the Kensington rune stone. You can see in this photo, there's a hillock in the background. And in 1898, a Swedish farmer by the name of Olof Oman, who was clearing his land, found this rune stone entangled in the roots of a tree. And since then, there have been scores upon scores of scholarly articles in books and others that both agree and disagree about whether this is an authentic artifact. This is what the stone looks like. It is 200 pounds, and it's made out of gray whack, which is typically used in the Red River Valley of the North for tombstones. And here's the narrative, and this is a reflection of the narrative for a stone that has been on display in the Smithsonian Institution and the World Fair and has toured all of Europe. We did a translation a couple of years ago simply as an indication of all the visitors that would come to Alexandria, Minnesota to see this stone. So it's translated into Latin, Swedish, Norwegian, and Danish. And here's the story on the face of the stone. 8 Gotalanders and 22 Northmen on this exploration acquisition journey from Vinland westwards. We had a camp by 2, and the missing word may be island. 1 day's journey north from this stone. We went fishing one day. After we came home, we found 10 men red with blood and death. Ave Maria, save us from evil. On the side of the stone. There are 10 men by the sea to look after our ships, 14 days' journey from this island peninsula, year 1362, 130 years before Christopher Columbus. And so a couple of things about this. Our scholars within the last decade, two of them, Dr. Hendrik Williams from Uppsala University and Dr. Dick Wilhelm from Texas, have been retranslating the stone and have changed a ton of the words that were mistakenly translated in the past. And what they did is they didn't define a date on it. And so when you look at words like exploration and acquisition or island and peninsula, those words would be the translations of whether it would be the Viking Age or also the medieval age. When you look at a word like the word sea, that could refer to an inland sea, Lake Superior, which is nearby. One of the things they have concluded in this research is it definitely was not carved by Olof Oman as a Swedish farmer. And the reason for that is they came to that conclusion because of idiom and dialect. So let me give you an example of that. If I was in Minnesota, I would say, how are you today? If I'm in North Texas, I would say, how are all y'alls? Says the same thing, but expressed a different way. And the idiom on this stone would not be the idiom that would be used by a Swedish farmer back in 1898. So now let's move to the state in North America that has the most rune stones, and that's Oklahoma. And here you see Dr. Williams in the foreground and Dr. Nielsen in the background. This is an examination that was done of the Heavener rune stone back in 2011, and Dr. Williams was here again earlier this spring. And there are a couple of translations for this stone that have been offered. One is Gnomes Valley, which is a land claim, which is quite common. The other is Difficult Valley, and for those who've ever been to the Heavener rune stone, it's a heck of a climb up and down, even in the parks, what used to be a state park stairs to get there. And you can see on the side there the actual letters themselves. Now, as Dr. Williams looks at this, he's studied over 1,000 rune stones in direct field visits, and he considers this to be in his top 20 of the most beautiful stones that he's seen because of the quality of the artisanship of the carver. But it's an open question of whether it's authentic. He gives it about a 20% chance. And the reason for that is twofold. One is Gnomes Valley is actually the mixture of two alphabets that are several hundred years apart. While it's extremely rare, but not uncommon for that to occur. The other one would be in the 8th century, which is before the Vikings and Scandinavians even had seafaring technology. So the question is, how would they get here? But there is one other consideration here, which is the actual historic archive, which we are continuing our search through, which is that says that this stone was first reported by a Choctaw hunting party in 1830. Well, if that's the case and it can be proven, that really changes the argument, because in 1830, there weren't books of runic characters that someone could have hauled out to the Eastern Ozarks and made this carving. So the research on this continues. When Dr. Williams was here in the spring, he visited the Poto Museum and looked at other runestones as well, too. There are about a half a dozen runestones that we've examined, he's examined, and there are others in Oklahoma that he would like to have an opportunity to look at. These are the Shawnee and the Poto runestones. One of them he declared to be a forgery or a practice copy because it's exactly the same letters as the Heavener runestone, except they're transposed, so it doesn't make a word. The other one still remains open to investigation. This is the Turley runestone. This is the first time, like the other stones, that an actual runic scholar actually investigated them. This is outside of Tulsa, and we had to trudge across a snake-infested landfill to get to this. And that's important because if you look at where he's pointing on this rune, immediately to the left, you'll see a serpent that's carved into it. Now, his conclusion is this is not a Scandinavian runestone because in order to be so, there have to be at least 2 runes from the Futhark alphabet. There's only one. So while this is not runic, the case is still out in the investigation of who carved this. Here's another example. We had a runestone that was sent to us by someone who owned it from Texas. It was found in a demolition of a 100-year-old home. And as you look at this, you'll see the letters are only about 1 inch high, which is quite a bit different than others. And also, it's really smooth. It's not chiseled out. Looks like somebody did it with a Dremel tool. Well, as Dr. Williams and others looked at it, they came to the conclusion that this is a literal translation, a literal copy from the 1864 novel by Jules Verne of Journey to the Center of the Earth. Now, looking at runestones like this, you can find them everywhere in the United States. Another good example, a recent one was a couple of years ago. A rune was investigated outside of Kansas City. And on the investigation, it turned out that it was actually written in Gaelic, the ancient language of Ireland. And it was an 1870 commemoration for a wedding. And we know that because we found the marriage certificate. And so people will do these things. They could be modern artifacts. Now we're going to talk about the dark side of the story. The misinformation and pseudo archaeology that offers this incredible other narrative of how runes came to be across the United States and what exactly they mean. This is U-Haul. Several years ago, they rolled out several thousand trucks to represent Minnesota, and you see both the Kensington Rune Stone and the Viking era. Well, they don't fit. The Vikings were done several hundred years before the date of 1362, if that stone is authentic. So why would this matter? Well, the point is that when they rolled this out, they also built an extensive website about the Kensington Rune Stone that's available to students and scholars and the general public. When we saw what was up there, we found it was riddled with misinformation, and also it had pseudo archaeology explanations for the Kensington Rune Stone. So we offered to correct the record, and they said, sure, send the data to us. We invested a substantial amount of time, and we sent that off to them. And 3 years later, they've yet to correct the record, nor even to acknowledge that we sent them a corrected record. So let's talk about pseudo archaeology. And this is the popularization of narratives like the Kensington Rune Stone and others. And when you look at shows like America on Earth and Ancient Aliens, this is why we debunk them. These shows have as much viewership on a daily basis as the Daily Show with Jon Stewart. There's a lot of following to this. And their narrative is essentially this. It begins with something that you're all familiar with. You know, the Friday the 13th is an unlucky day, right? Well, the reason it's unlucky is because of the fact that on Friday, October 13th in 1307, King Philip of France ordered the simultaneous arrest of all Knights Templars in that country. Now, the Knights Templar were a militaristic religious order who became extremely wealthy and powerful in the Crusades. Well, they were arrested, tortured to confess to heresy, and executed. And in 1312, Pope Clement extended that throughout Europe. And so the myth and the legend and lore is that the Knights Templars got into their ships, sailed to North America, and you can see the symbolic record across the ruins of North America that shows how they traveled. And it takes it a step further, that the Knights Templar became the Freemasons, became the Illuminati, and the Illuminati are a secret society that's trying to run the world. So when you look at this as an example of just how they use one symbol, the Cross of Lorraine, to try to tell a story, this is a clip from one of those shows, and watch the voice, the narrative, the drama, the staging, so that it appears to be accurate. So let's watch the video.
Scott, I know that you love milk. Let's have a treat.
That sounds great. What is the deal?
We're gonna have some cookies.
Really?
I just thought you'd like a nice little treat.
Well, that's very thoughtful of you. Thank you very much.
But take a look at the cookie before you eat it. What do you see on the cookie?
I see a cross of Lorraine. Shut up. Look at that.
Little Templar crosses on there.
This is so Masonic. What the hell? You know, I'm a little embarrassed. I thought for sure I would notice something like this. This is incredible. And actually, I've seen it so many times, but it's not until I looked at this that I really realized.
And what do you see on the package?
I see a cross of Lorraine. I see red and white cross of Lorraine.
So, Oreo cookies have been around for 75 years, 500 million made. They'll encircle the earth 400 times, and somebody just noticed this. This is a good indication of the story. The story for this actually originated on a conspiracy blog site back in 2004. And for an anniversary of Nabisco and for the Oreo cookies in 2011, both Time Magazine and Atlantic told this narrative. And if you go to the web today and you look at Oreo cookies, you will find people who will say, well, mainstream media said it, so it must be true. Just saying. Now, you can find the same sort of thing. You can find Masonic and Freemason symbols throughout logos in corporate America. You can find it in Adidas and in Nike and in Coca-Cola and Starbucks and hundreds of others. But that's how these narratives get started. One other point about this, if you ever take a look at double stuffed cookies for Oreos, according to the pseudo-archaeologists, they look like Christ's sarcophagus. So why should this matter? Well, the simple point is, we're a university. We should be concerned about developing critical thinkers. The most important thing to the future of America economically are people who can sort through facts, whether in the United States or specifically in Oklahoma. The good part about this is that often the pseudo-archaeology would be ignored. Scholars just simply would not raise it to the level of a debate because they didn't want to give them credence. But it's been so pervasive, they're beginning to tackle them now. And as scholarly researchers will tell you is that the pseudo-archaeologists will take a couple of facts and throw them into a blender and see what comes out. Or they'll use selective facts and they'll create wacky strings of pearls. Why does this matter? Well, Most of the people who are viewers and users of these kinds of pseudo-archaeology programs are young people. And what these scholars have found is that often their students will kind of be fence sitters. Well, I don't know that I accept it, but I'm not going to reject it. Or you'll have the other part, which is dualistic thinking. Things are either right or wrong, good or bad, black or white. It must be true because I saw it in the media, and that's what I'm going to accept. So, as I said, part of our function for our association is to confront, the myth, legend, lore, cliche, and platitudes that are out there about these kinds of studies. We are told repeatedly by people who are pseudo-archaeologists and their fans that we as scholars should keep an open mind. Well, we are keeping an open mind. That's why we've been investigating the Kensington Rune Stones from a scholarly exploration for over 100 years. That's why the Heavener Rune Stone and others may take decades more in order to come up to whether the question of are they real historic artifacts or are they false, are they forgeries. We will keep an open mind, and all I can say is stay tuned. Sooner or later we will have the truth for you. Thank you.